My name's David McEwen, and I almost have to apologize here as I'm replacing Dr. Roman Velasquez. So I'm going to try and go over some of the same themes that she would have spoken about, and kind of hope I don't. I hope I do her research justice, because I think that forms the basis of a lot of what I'm going to be speaking about. So what I want to try and do today is to kind of trace a trajectory of the way the Latin American community here in London has developed and how they found their home within London. And as an introduction, I guess I have to say that this is something that at least Dr. Roman Velasquez, and I think I agree with her, we call this Latin urbanisms. So the name of my presentation would be The Development of London's Latin Urbanism. London's Latin urbanisms are concentrated in three key areas within London. We have the area around Elephant and Castle in South London. We have Seven Sisters here in Tottenham, and the area of Brent in northwest London. And these are three highly significant areas where the Latin American community has significantly shaped the urban space, where they've shaped their neighborhoods and created communities. These three areas share a few characteristics. Firstly, they are home to the largest concentration of Latin American businesses in London, and in fact, I believe the UK. These are significant because you find a lot of people living throughout London, and even the UK, traveling to these areas specifically to visit these businesses. They are economically unequal boroughs. They're incredibly diverse, with a proportion of the population identifying as with a migrant ethnic background, at least over 40%. And these three areas are at the center of large programs of regeneration. And these are regenerations these are regeneration programs which follow similar patterns, in which a lot of these neighborhoods and streets are being replaced by residential developments and luxury flat developments. Also, I think another, maybe the most important characteristic, is that in these three areas in London, the Latin American community has significantly and positively shaped the streets or the communities into successful spaces. Within these three cases, regeneration has disproportionately affected the Latin American community and Black and minority ethnic communities. Regeneration is, in these areas, it's situated in some of London's most deprived and ethnically diverse boroughs. These areas are also economically disadvantaged, and migrant and ethnic groups are particularly and especially affected by regeneration programs. And it is because of this that Latin Americans specifically in London are now facing the brunt of regeneration. They're facing the communities most under threat within these spaces. What this means also is that you find shifting populations or demographics that come after development. And this is a development that results in a prioritizing of perhaps a middle class or a white middle class, or it prioritizes a population that's looking for speculative investment or perhaps even foreign investors. Another point I think which is quite significant is that all these areas have developed organically, and they haven't been developed as part of government or developer-led placemaking initiatives, which I think is quite significant because particularly that feels like quite a trendy kind of urban regeneration program. These spaces, particularly these businesses, are characterized as spaces of entrepreneurship. They are home to significant social and cultural networks, and within them you can find certain, characteristics or elements of a Latin American identity, which could include Latin American products, music, language. They also have a high number of businesses owned by women. So just to focus on two of these cases in particular, I'll speak about Elephant and Castle and provide a bit of context about Seven Sisters as well, because I think they have a similar sort of history or context. So the Latin American community in Elephant and Castle, according to Dr. Roman Velasquez, has formed something of a Latin quarter. The businesses around it have developed into clusters. And these are, at the moment, they find themselves in the center of some of Europe's largest regeneration programs, which include £1 billion developments in Elephant Park, where the Highgate Estate used to be, and the Elephant and Castle shopping centre development. And in this case, you have principal actors being Transport for London, private development firm Delancey, Network Rail, and also Lend-Lease. The Latin American community here form a significant group. They represent 8.9% of the population is 8.9% of the borough. There are 96 shops within the area around Elephant and Castle which form a cluster, 96 Latin American shops, and 41% of the businesses in Elephant and Castle, Latin American businesses, are owned and operated by women. What you also find within Elephant and Castle, particularly within the regeneration schemes, is a limited provision of affordable retail units, which contravenes local policy, local Southwark Council policy, and well, also affordable housing, which I think is quite endemic throughout London. Also within Elephant and Castle, one space I'd like to point out is the space around the bingo hall, because this is an area where we've had a bit of success arguing for the significance of migrant ethnic and minority ethnic spaces, where the bingo hall, we managed to argue for an equalities impact assessment to be conducted, which revealed an incredibly fascinating kind of dynamic happening within the space. What we found was this was an incredibly important and significant area, not only for Latin American migrants, but also Black and minority ethnic communities, and also people, I think older people who are typically, well, all of these groups are typically discounted from regeneration processes or consultation processes. That's a bit of background on Elephant and Castle. Now towards Seven Sisters. Here we have a regeneration program which forms part of Seven Sisters Market at the moment and Apex House, coordinated by TfL, Granger. We have 187 different businesses outside of the market, with around that area of the market, with 183 identified as minority ethnic businesses. Within the market, there are around 39 shops or 39 units run by people with a Black and minority ethnic background. We have a successful community plan, which was granted a few years back, which I think we'll speak about in a bit. But also, we have a situation in which a kind of historic fabric is being disrupted by regeneration, which is slightly different from the situation in Elephant and Castle, but I think it's something that's worth mentioning. It's a situation in which the space around the market is under threat by your typical kind of monotonous development that you find throughout the whole of London. And again, it's a development or a regeneration plan which doesn't really reflect or consider really the local community. Just to kind of cap that off, I'd like to identify certain, because it's quite difficult sometimes to have these conversations and keep things quite negative. So we have had certain successes and certain recognition of the Latin American community. For instance, through a lot of Dr. Roman Velasquez's work and her organization Latin Elephant, we've managed to argue for a recognition of migrant ethnic businesses within the London plan, and also managed to influence certain Southwark local policy. We also managed to argue for an equalities impact assessment in Elephant and Castle, which was conducted within the bingo hall, which we found incredibly important to argue for certain cases that we had. We have the successful community plan that was accepted here in Seven Sisters. And I think we've managed to kind of to receive some concessions when it's come to individual regeneration plans. So, for instance, more affordable retail units in Elephant and Castle. And I think perhaps within the regeneration plan here, there's some arguing or that there's some concession related to affordable retail space within Granger's plan for the new site. But it's something which is ultimately disruptive to the current community, and which fails completely to acknowledge what makes the current community and current area so successful. So if I could just leave you with a quote which I think is quite nice in tracing the way that Latin American urbanisms within London have kind of changed. If at the beginning of the 1990s, manifestations of Latin urbanism are rooted in displays of identity through structures, objects, sounds, and smells, the context of regeneration and gentrification has triggered another manifestation of Latin urbanism rooted in resistance, protest, and resilience. Thank you very much.